welcome everybody. Another episode of Legend Sports and Amplify, and we're talking baseball history and Negro League history, card art, collecting, whatever your passion is for baseball and baseball history. And I am really, really happy today, this morning, to have on author, researcher, Scott Simkus. How are you, man?
I'm doing good, Philip. Thanks for having me on, man. It's cool to be here.
Thank you. This would be a lot of fun. I've been looking forward to having you on here, but I've been trying to stay out of a lot of people's hair here recently because everything that's been going on with Major League Baseball's announcements and Baseball Reference recently, and you were right in the middle of all that. I know you've been probably busy as heck with all that, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, between the day job and the announcement last December, it's been a really interesting time. I've done a lot of interviews, and it's just pretty cool to be part of baseball history, to be a small part of this team that has done something that I think is correcting baseball history. So
absolutely,
it's been a wild ride, man. It's been a wild ride.
I bet. And you know, it's got to be great, right? After how many years? And you tell us a little bit of your story. I love the origin stories. Dr. Brunson James Brunson talked about it a few months ago, kind of mentioned that about some of these players, their origin stories. And I've been using that term because I think it's great. It's like superhero, it gives like a nice little context. But I love to hear people's origin stories. So yours goes back, I mean, so like I said, it's got to feel great after all these years of being at something, to really see it come to this fruition has got to be great. So, you know, if you can walk us through how you got into this and
sure,
how we got to today, because I think it's an awesome story.
Yeah. So, well, I like you, I grew up in a baseball family. Fourth generation Chicago Cubs fans. So really going back to the 1880s. I think my great grandfather would have seen Cap Anson and King Kelly.
Oh,
I know
wow.
I know my other great grandfather definitely saw Tinker to Evers to Chance, and he lived to be 91. So he saw Ernie Banks and Billy Williams. He lived a long life and was a devoted Cubs fan till the end. And of course, my grandfather and my dad were ball players, amateur ball players.
Cool.
And so we grew up in a family where he told stories about baseball history. My dad's first game was, and I've told this story a few times, his first game when he was a boy, he was 9 years old. They went to Wrigley Field. The game was sold out, and they had to give a police officer like $5 or something to sneak in the left field bleachers, and it was Jackie Robinson's debut with the Brooklyn Dodgers in '47. So my dad was there when Robinson made his debut in Chicago, which is cool. So growing up in a Cubs family, when I did, I'm 51. Most of the teams were terrible until recent years. So what you did was you spent a lot of time talking about the past. My grandmother saw Kai Kyler and Hack Wilson, and that's the kind of family that I grew up in, where you talked about and respected baseball history. And so I was into everything, collecting baseball cards. I spent a lot of time at the library, reading just devouring everything that they had there, including the baseball encyclopedia. We loved keeping score at games. I still have some of the old scorecards from when we would go to Wrigley Field and occasionally go to Comiskey to watch the White Sox. And I recently looked through them, and I noticed that, one game my mom would keep score, another time my father would, or sometimes it'd be my chicken scratch when I was a little kid. But everybody in our family knew how to keep score, and we were, kind of a competitive family with little board games and stuff like that. And we had to quantify. This is probably my dad's thing, It's just we would quantify and want to keep statistics for everything we did, and so that's always stuck with me. Always been interested in the Negro Leagues. At that same time when I was playing Little League Baseball, I stumbled across Robert Peterson's, incredible book, Only the Ball Was White, published in 1970. So I stumbled across that and was fascinated by these stories about Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson and Cool Papa Bell. And then I was also frustrated because then I would go to the baseball encyclopedia, and at that time there was no information about these teams or players. They were folklore. They were like Paul Bunyan or Johnny Appleseed or Annie Oakley or whatever the the case may be, and it had bothered me. I wanted to know more. Also my grandfather, when I was little, he had played semi-pro ball in Chicago in the 30s, and he had played against the Cuban Stars. And I remember him telling me about that. I didn't really understand what that meant, didn't realize till later in life what a big deal that was. And I wish he was around so I could kind of ask some follow-up questions and get the details. So I've always been interested in baseball history, period, with a special interest in Negro League ball. And boy, oh boy, I played softball and stuff when I was in my 20s and into my early 30s. And when I finally hung up the cleats, we had a couple of kids and stuff, I still wanted to satisfy that baseball itch beyond watching the Cubs, finish in 5th place. And so I started getting into the research and getting a microfilm of the Chicago Tribune, the Chicago Defender, and started looking for box scores. I think initially I was looking for family stuff, looking for that game that my grandfather may have appeared in, which I've never found. But during that process, I became really, really interested in the Chicago American Giants and the Pittsburgh Crawfords, and I realized, my gosh, you could actually go and find these box scores and game stories, and I started to collect that stuff. I was not a member of SABR at the time. I had written to John Holloway and Dick Clark, who were heroes of mine when I was a teenager. I read their books and articles, and but it hadn't materialized into something serious until I got into my 30s. One of the pieces of my education as a baseball fan was playing Stratomatic baseball. Mm-hmm. The board game created by Hal Richmond out of Glen Head, New York. And I learned a lot about baseball from playing that, because they used to.
So did I.
Yeah, they would put out old timer teams, as you know, and then they started to do complete seasons. And so my friends and I, even as teenagers, we would buy the 1930 set, and we would buy the 1970 set, which was old for us. That was the year we were born. And started to play with older teams. We'd play these little seasons against each other. There were 4 of us. And you learned a lot about baseball history from playing a game. Mm-hmm. And at a certain point, the internet started to become a big thing, and you could find your little tribe of people, like-minded folks, and I found there were little Stratomatic communities, and I was more of a lurker. I would just follow the conversations on there, and I noticed that there was an interest in a Negro League set, which Stratomatic had never produced. And as you know, Hal's very protective of the brand and of the quality of the product, and they just did not want to produce a set that was based on hearsay or legends. Mm-hmm. I approached Hal, probably 2008, maybe 2008 or 2009, and said, Hal, I've got box scores. I've got probably 2,500 or 3,000 of these. I can't put together a full season, but we could probably put together a set with, say, 100 guys, and I could put together credible lefty-righty splits, which is very important to the simulation for both pitchers and batters. And he said no. And then, about a year later, I don't know what was happening in Glen Head, New York, but he called me up out of the blue and said, you know what, let's talk about this. And so we started some conversations, and I explained to him what the limitations would be and what the opportunities were. And we finally agreed to put out a set, which we did back in, I think 2010 is when it was released. It was like 103 cards. I can't remember exactly how many players. We had maybe 97 players, 5 of which were two-way players, Bullet Rogan and Dihigo and some of these guys. So that was my first big research project, was on behalf of the Stratomatic Game Company. And it was a project that got a lot of attention. I was working for a limousine company. It had nothing to do with really sports, although I had been a sports writer earlier in my life, in my 20s. At this point, I just was out of that. And the next thing I know, I've got the New York Times calling me and doing a story.
Cool.
There was a little blurb about the set and about my work in Sports Illustrated. So it was this thing that I worked really, really hard on for a couple of years. And I got a lot of attention for the work that I had put in. I mean, most of it really is the Stratomatic brand and the loyal following that they have. But I was the beneficiary of that. And that opened up a lot of doors, Philip. That I would meet people online. One of the first guys I connected with is Gary Ashwell, whose name is really well known now, as it should be. Saw him on the Baseball Think Factory in these conversations. They had something, and I think they still do, called the Hall of Merit, where the Sabre guys and hardcore baseball fans would come up with systems to try to select the guys they would like to have in their fictional Hall of Fame based on the merit, based on the data. And Gary was one of the guys in the comments section. By the way, he just won the Chadwick Award with Sabre, which is the highest thing you can get for his work on the database, and we'll talk about that. So what Gary was posting was just different than the other guys that are on there. And there was talented people. Eric Enders, who I think you've talked to, is a really good data analyst. But they were using just fragmentary data. You're talking 10, 12 years ago, and trying to come up with ways to quantify and qualify how talented guys were. But Gary was the one guy that was actually reconstructing stats, whether they were from Cuba or from the 1920 Negro League, and he was compiling defensive stats with chances, putouts, and errors. And I immediately recognized that this guy was different. And so I connected with him, and then later I would meet Kevin Johnson and Mike Lynch from the Seamheads.com website. And so after the Strat set came out, we started to publish a history called the Outsider Baseball Bulletin for three and a half years, a weekly publication. We would charge $22 for a year, and you'd get 52 issues. And cool. It attracted the attention of John Thorne and Gary Gillette and Rob Nyer. There were a handful of people, Joe Sheehan. We never got a lot of subscribers. It was a money loser for me, but that was not what it was about. It was about just pursuing these little research things, writing about it. And, we had a couple hundred people that would read this every week, and some of them were the brightest and most influential people in the world of baseball history. So the Stratomatic set led to this e-zine, which ended up, I connected with an agent in New York City, a literary agent. Stratomatic had invited me out to New York for their 50th anniversary. And so I met with an agent in Times Square before that event, and that led a couple years later to a book called Outsider Baseball, The Weird World of Hardball on the Fringe. And the book was kind of the byproduct of the research that I had done for Stratomatic, and also the research that I had done for the Outsider Baseball Bulletin. And then the book, we started to post stats at the Seamheads.com website. I had rebuilt the 1933 Negro League season, which is the stats that you now see at Baseball Reference. I rebuilt the 1943 season, and then helped Gary with a number of other different years, did a big chunk of 1922, and I would find various games for different years. So I became part of the team that built this database. And I got to be honest with you, at no point, maybe once or twice we had a conversation, but our objective wasn't to, our objective was to just record what these guys had actually done and do it in a systematic way where everything balanced, and use algorithms to troubleshoot issues with the box scores. And we just wanted to, it was hard to find Negro League data the previous 3 years. So we wanted to share something in a public forum so that other historians or baseball fans would have access to it. And really, we weren't thinking at all about Major League Baseball or the designation that would eventually come. And now I'm going to take a pause and have a drink of water.
Absolutely.
I've been rambling
So
here,
while you're drinking that water, I want to follow up on a couple of things that you just talked about, because people may not be familiar with some of the things you just mentioned, but I am, because Stratomatic to me, I don't know if you could see it, but I still have the writing callus on my finger
oh
from
yeah,
I mean, I can't even imagine. I can't count. I mean, it's got to be tens of thousands of box scores from when I was probably 7, 8, 9 years old when I first got my first set, and Stratomatic was like, I mean, when I wasn't doing schoolwork or playing baseball or playing a sport in the wintertime, it was what I was doing, so I can definitely relate. I mean, we would go. My friends and I would not only do the box scores by hand, but any game we went to, didn't matter whether it was a Phillies game, a high school game, whatever. We were into statistics, and it kind of put me down. It's funny how little things in your life take you down a path that you just never would have think. Because I ended up in finance and accounting and numbers and I don't never considered myself a numbers guy, but I tell you what, my interest in it starts with, like you mentioned, Stratomatic box scores, doing all of that work. And even when I was playing Little League and into high school, keeping statistics on everything, like we're talking about,
yes.
You did it. I mean, that's just what you did. I mean, it was so much fun. So Stratomatic, I get it. I mean, dice and cards, then they got into the computer game, and that opened up a whole nother world. We went out and bought, my friend and I went, we chipped in. We were in college now at this point when they first came out, I think, with their first computer set. I want to say maybe around 83, 4, 5, somewhere around in there. And we went and we bought, we chipped in a couple bucks a piece and bought whatever version it was. It was like the floppies, like the 5 1/4 inch floppies that came on,
yes.
and we couldn't wait, to get it. And that's all we did with it. We literally bought a computer just so we could play the Stratomatic game on the computer. I mean, it was like an obsession, and I'm sure lots of people can relate to having obsessions with baseball. But so the 50th anniversary, so people don't know, Stratomatic's been around since 1960. Right, so you're talking 2010, right? That you were talking about the 50th anniversary.
Probably 2012. I think they're 62. Right?
Okay.
They're celebrating they're celebrating 61. They're celebrating their 60th anniversary this year.
Cool. I mean, it's
amazing.
It's an amazing thing that he put together. Now his son actually runs it, right? I guess.
Yeah. Adam Richmond is. I think he's the guy calling a lot of the shots. But I know that Hal is still actively involved, and I know that he still signs the residual checks for the set that I do, which is amazing because we're still selling.
I don't know if he'll remember me from my conversation with him in like 1997, but tell him I said hello.
Okay.
because I like I said, my friend and I, Larry Denicola and I, we had put together a card set that it was probably for the computer game, but not the actual physical cards. But it was 700-800 players that we did, and I have the spreadsheets. I can show you the spreadsheets that we still have.
Does your work still hold up well?
I haven't really gone back and looked. It's such a long time ago, and then I got into playing out of the park, and I stepped out of Stratomatic, like I told you. I sold all my card sets and off I went. But that's a whole other story. But but I was a lifelong Strat head for sure. I even have the T-shirt that said Stratomatic Fanatic on it and all that kind of stuff. But I get it, and it gets into you. So why I'm having these conversations is so people can hear, what makes people passionate about something. And in your case, and in the cases of people like Larry Lester, Phil Dixon, Bob Kendrick, James Brunson, all these researchers and historians that have been at this with the Negro Leagues for such a long time, to be able to now see what's happened in the last year has got to be a great feeling. Did I lose you, man? Uh-oh.
Oh, man.
Nope, now you're back.
Can you hear me?
Now you're back again. Yeah, we had
sorry about that.
That's okay. We had a little glitch. Sometimes it's the Zoom. No, there's no thunderstorm. I had one stream, a thunderstorm, just enough to flash the lights, and it knocked my Wi-Fi off, and you know. But no, you're back.
Yeah.
But what I was, I don't know if you heard what I was saying, but what got people, to this point that have been at this for such a long time, it's got to be a great feeling to see what's happened in the last year with the announcement of Major League Baseball, recognizing the 7 Negro Leagues, Baseball Reference, and you have got a big hand in that. And hats off to you, man, because you and many of these other researchers that didn't keep these, if these stories weren't kept alive, who knows what conversation we'd be having today. I mean, like you said,
Yeah.
so much of it is, you gotta. I'm trying to, with these, hopefully give people context, strip away some of that mythology, because, like you said, there is a lot of that, but
Yeah.
because of the time period that we're talking here, because of the racial context that we're also talking here, there's a reason why that there's some of this had to be mythologized.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You didn't have statistics that were published after most of the season, so most of it was oral tradition. And thank God for Holloway and some of these guys back in the '70s who drove around and talked to Buck Leonard and Webster McDonald and all of these guys, that they recorded the stories. So it started with the oral tradition. And then guys in the late '70s and '80s and women, researchers started to seek out the box scores to see if we could build. Um,
I'd like to hear a little bit on how you did that, but one to give a little context to that. I don't know if this is a good analogy or not, but just because there was the mythology, and I'm sure the Hallway books and even the baseball, the Negro League Encyclopedia, and some of that were put out 20, 30 years ago, some of them longer. Things have changed. More information has come to light. And I don't know if this is a good analogy or not, but it's kind of like archaeology, right? You discover something, you make a premise, you go with it, and as you discover more information, you change it, you refine it. It doesn't make what was first discovered wrong. It just means you've learned more. And I don't want people to get the impression that, oh well, yeah, Josh Gibson hit 900 home runs, right? Well, no, he didn't. Well, yes, he did.
Right.
But the context is different with the barnstorming and everything else involved with that. So I just hope people don't discount some of the mythology, because it's an important part of all this. And like you just said, it was really for a long time the only way, because there were just no concrete box scores and things to really be able to verify some of this stuff. So how did you go
Yeah.
about digging for those?
So, first of all, you're absolutely right. I think the stories are really the most important part. That's what draws us to this.
Yeah.
But being baseball guys, that we love our data. I started with microfilm, going to the Chicago Public Library, and also my local library, go through interlibrary loan and have them send up papers from Columbus, Ohio, from Newark, New Jersey. I was able to get some reels. So it was, at the beginning, it was poring over microfilm, making photocopies of the box scores and putting them into a manila folder. But then there has been this explosion of digitization of historical newspapers, and every day there
I love
are
it.
additional. Yeah, and that is really the game. A couple things are game changers. Number one, the invention of the Excel spreadsheet, so you could start to put this into a digital format, and where you could sort it and you could double check things very quickly to make sure they balanced. So technology has really been the game changer. The digitization of the newspapers. Now we don't have to. I spent a lot of money having papers shipped in and traveling too a little bit. I've traveled to 4 states to look for box scores, and that stuff has subsided. There's enough stuff online and currently and constantly being updated that you can find a lot of new information right from your living room. So those are the game changers. The other one that maybe doesn't get enough attention is just sabermetrics in general. The fact that we understand baseball math a lot better than we did even 30 years ago because of Bill James and some of these guys. And that really is helpful when you talk about the problems that you have with box scores. There were certain cities that didn't list the at-bats in box scores. And what you do is you try to find a different account of the game, and oftentimes you're able to do that from maybe a different newspaper in a different city that had the at-bats. And you can fill in gaps that way by combining multiple game stories, by reading the game stories and looking for details. But there are instances where the at-bats are missing from a small percentage of the box scores. And that's one of the criticisms from people who would just, I'd rather not, I would just discredit all the stats because,
Right.
say 15% of the box scores don't have at-bats. Well, you got news for you folks. It's pretty easy to come up with an algorithm. I don't know if it's easy, but for the people that I work with, are pretty smart. It's doable.
Yeah.
You can work at it. You can test it. You can take major league box scores from the 20s and let's knock out the at bats for these and test the algorithm and see how close we're matching up. And these things are a 98% plus solution for the problems with the box scores. So sabermetrics, the Excel spreadsheet, the internet, and historical papers that are available on the internet. That's what's changed. I was pretty good friends with John Holloway. He was a big supporter of my work 10, 12 years ago. And he went around with yellow pads and pencil. This is the 70s and the 80s. And that's how he was doing this. And I believe all of that material is at the Hall of Fame. If I'm not, he has donated it there. But he was going around with pads of paper and pencils and writing down lines of data, just dozens and dozens of lines every time you went to the library. And you're opening yourself up to mistakes, because the black newspapers came out usually once a week. And it was you're going to get a lot of material from the Defender and the Pittsburgh Courier, but it can be difficult to figure out which days those games are played on. They might say, well, last Thursday, but you don't know if it was 2 days ago or 9 days ago. So you got to untangle that stuff, and you open yourself up to errors if you're not very careful when you're doing the research. So that's one of the things we focused on. Now that you have the technology and the tools, let's take our time. Let's methodically go through this. And let's make sure we have stuff that's as error-free as possible. But like you said, take your ego, throw it in the garbage. That if we have a new game story that emerges 6 months from now and it contradicts what we may have originally assumed about that game, then we're going to make the correction. Everything that we're doing is well-meaning, but we're open to corrections. People don't understand the data that's now posted at baseballreference.com. This is as dang close to Major League as you're going to get.
One of the things I've had people push back on me, like they look at that on Baseball Reference and they go, wait a minute, how is Eugene Bremer now the one who has the lowest single season ERA? Uh-oh. Did I lose you again? You still there, Scott? Aye, bummer. Uh-oh. Hold on, folks. I think Scott's glitching here. Yeah, his Wi-Fi. Hang on 1 second while he reconnects. Technical issues are always fun, aren't they, on these things? Well, I'm going to talk while he's getting reconnected here. Sorry about that, folks. So Gary Gillette, when I had him on a few weeks ago, had a great point when it comes to all this that we're talking about, that the Negro Leagues may be not 100% complete. However, um, that meant a portion of Major League Baseball players that were playing in Major League Baseball were not necessarily Major League caliber either. And no one is going to go back and take out the Major League players who may or may not have been able to play. He just told me he's got a thunderstorm that is giving him a little bit of trouble with his Wi-Fi. I definitely hear that. But no one is going to go back and have taken out any major league players who may have been 4A or AAA talent, and so to consider that the Negro Leagues are not major leagues, it's just really, I think, disingenuous. I mean, they were playing behind a color barrier at the time, and it was not of their choosing. They were playing under conditions at the time that were, nothing that we would experience today. And I think part of the problem is that everyone wants to, I guess, see all of this in a 162 game format with nice box scores and the upcoming schedule and who's the next starter. That's not the way the Negro Leagues could operate, nor did they want to operate. Much of what they were doing at the time, they made a lot of money barnstorming, so they only played league games on the weekend. During the week they were traveling. It was a different time period, so you can't put that same modern or even semi-modern context to the Negro Leagues because they didn't have the same conditions that they were working under. All right, he's buffering, he said. Again, apologies. Scott's trying to get reconnected again here. I hate to shut this off because I was really looking forward to this for a long, long time. Bummer. All right, let me put a little music on here while Scott is trying to get reconnected. And again, apologies for all of that. But these things happen, right? You know what I can do? I can show you guys while we're waiting. Someone asked me this morning about what simulation am I using for my 1920 simulation. So I'm going to go ahead and put that up because this is Out of the Park Baseball, which a few months back when I first started this little project, I was going through how I set this up, how I did the research, how I added these players, how I added the photographs, how I did logos, all that kind of thing. I set up the 1920 season, and then I played it out. And as you can see, we can look at the history here. In 1920, the New York Giants won the pennant, defeating the Yankees. And then in the Negro Leagues, the Bacharach Giants of the Eastern Colored League, which didn't exist at the time, but I kind of took a little poetic license, they defeated the Chicago American Giants in a 9-game series. So then I went to 1921, and in 1921, I allowed integration. So it was interesting because several of these teams, and let's see if I could find it, I've been keeping a tracker of, I just let the game go ahead and do this on its own, go ahead and sign players to contract and I guess more or less purchase them out of the Negro Leagues. So I'm going to bring up that spreadsheet so you can see that as well, because it's an interesting Um, Alright, so Scott is rebooting his router. Alright. And he said, can we edit this out? Oh, yeah, I could do that later. I'm working on that. All right, he's rebooting his Wi-Fi. So the game went ahead and it started to sign players on its own based on the algorithms that are within the game. And I just want to show you who each team took, and I've been kind of keeping a tracker here. Let me go ahead and switch over to that. Because it's interesting. The game, obviously doesn't know that there was a color barrier. It just is not allowing. Prior was not allowing players from a certain league to come in. So once I turned off that checkbox, the team started to sign talent from the Negro leagues, which I would love to be able to switch this over and show you. While Scott is still getting connected. Yeah, I guess I'm going to have to figure out a way to edit this out. Alright, so let's see. I've got my 1920 Negro League player tracker here. So what I did here, I started to track as each team purchased a Negro League player. So the Boston Red Sox picked up outfielder Clarence Smith from the Kansas City Monarchs, and here's his little rundown of how he's performed, what he did in spring training, where he was on opening day, his first game that he played. So he on April 20th of 1921, he went ahead and got he went 2 for 3 off of Bob Shockey of the Yankees, and so forth. So the Hilldales sold Mule Suttles to the Boston Red Sox as well. He did not make the opening day roster, but was called up in June. His first game as a major league player, he went 0 for 3 with a walk off a Rollie Naylor. Chicago White Sox signed Biz Mackey and also Orville Singer. Some of the players that have really made an impact. Louis Santop was signed by the Cleveland Indians. Is not their starting catcher, though. But Alejandro Ohms has had a great career so far for the Indians. He's hitting 354 at the end of July. Let's see if Scott is back yet. Not yet. Let's see. Detroit signed Elias Country Brown. He's had a pretty solid year. 325 with 27 stolen bases. Was selected to the All-Star team. Let's see. The Yankees signed Cannonball Dick Redding and Chester Brooks. Chester Brooks is having a great year batting in front of Babe Ruth. 78 runs scored as Babe Ruth leads the American League with 32 home runs and 97 RBIs. He's dwarfing the rest of the league. Let's see. The Athletics signed Judd Wilson. Also having a great first half of his season. 397 into July with 45 doubles. That's astounding. They also signed Dobie Moore. The Browns signed Oscar Charleston, hitting 360 at the All-Star break, and did not make the All-Star team, which is pretty amazing. Let's see. They also signed Chino Smith, who is an outfielder, but has been playing second base for the and third base for the Browns, but he has the Browns in contention because the Browns are only 4 games back of the Indians, and I think they finished last in the American League that year, so they've made an impact. Let's see. They also signed Tiny Baldwin for some reason, and he is still on the reserve roster. Washington Senators signed Smokey Joe Williams, which I thought pairing him up with Walter Johnson would have made a big difference for the Senators, but they're still kind of in the middle of the pack. He's not pitched terrible, but not great. 11-15 in July for Smokey Joe. Turkey Stearns did not make the opening day roster, but was called up at the end of April. Not the regular starter. Plays quite a bit, I guess, but still young. He's only like 21 years old, 20 years old in 1921 is Turkey Stearns. National League teams, the Boston Braves signed Bullet Joe Rogan, who's probably had the most success of any of these players because he's batting cleanup and he's also the #1 starter for the Boston Braves, which is absolutely incredible. Was selected to the All-Star team at the break. The end of July now. He's 15-9 as a starting pitcher with a 2.32 ERA, and he's also hitting .325. And you know the game has all the things that you would want. Oh, here's Scott back. All right, good. Let me admit him back in here. All right. So, hey Scott, you're back,
Hey,
man. You're back,
I
man.
am.
See what did I tell you about thunderstorms? I'll tell you what. At the
I don't know
same,
what's going on. I still don't have cable, but I'm on the phone here without the Wi-Fi. Can you actually see me?
I can hear you, but the camera's not on, so
Okay.
now the mic is off.
Okay. You can hear me now.
I can hear you. Yes.
Yeah. Now, where would I get the video on this?
You know, I've never done it. I've got it on my phone. That's interesting.
Yeah. Let me do something. Hold on. Let me try this Twitch. Huh.
Let me look at my my phone. I've got the
Why don't you?
the Zoom camera on my phone, but I've never actually used it on my phone.
Yeah.
There's got to be a
Yeah.
button on there somewhere on your settings that turns your camera on and off, but I could hear you. So what I was doing while we were waiting for you to get back on here, I had done the 1920 season in Out of the Park.
Okay.
And I also played a parallel Negro Leagues. But I took a little liberties with it. I added the Eastern Colored League teams just so we could have all the players in there playing that deserved to be playing, that were playing in the East, not part of the Negro National League. And I had them play a Negro League World Series. So the Chicago American Giants ended up playing the Bacharachs in the World Series. The Bacharachs actually won in 9 games. And then I went ahead and I played the Giants won Major League Baseball in 1920. They beat the Yankees in 9 games. So I went ahead and I played the two of them against each other. And the Giants did win. They won in 8 games. And they were all very, very competitive. So it was a lot of fun to do that. So now 1921 comes along. And this game, if you're familiar with Out of the Park, you know how it works.
Yeah.
I mean,
Sure.
the players age and develop, and they do all those things within the confines of the game engine, right? So,
Yes.
so 1921 comes along, and I allowed the color barrier to come down, and I allowed the major league teams to purchase Negro League players. So I was just running through, and so probably more of them would have been purchased. Every team purchased at least one, some 2 or 3. It all had to do with how much cash they had on hand because it cost $2,500 to buy a player. So
Okay.
so what I think probably happened is some teams that didn't have the cash probably couldn't buy any more players, but it was interesting because the Red Sox signed Mule Suttles, Biz Mackey went to the White Sox. Um, Santop and Alejandro Ohms to the Indians. For some reason, the Tigers, and he's having a good year, but Country Brown was the player they decided. Elias Brown they signed.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the Yankees signed Cannonball Redding.
Philip, I'm going to try to log in on this so we can get a video again. I'm trying to get into this chat with the laptop again. Okay.
Gotcha. I just let you in there.
All right, let me get rid of this other one, and we're going to be back on track. So, I love that. Can you hear me, Phil?
Yeah, I got you.
All right, let me get video going here.
Yep, there you are.
So I love the sort of alternative.
It's so much fun, right? I mean,
it's a lot of fun. And as a matter of fact, in the book that I wrote, Outsider Baseball: The Weird World of Hardball and the Finch, it's funny you mentioned 1921. I tried to scour the Negro leagues and the guys who were in outlaw white minor leagues and some of the guys and tried to build an 8-team, I believe it was an 8-team league with the best players who were not part of the major leagues at that point. So you had Lefty Grove with the Baltimore Orioles, Oscar Charleston, and you would have been able to construct a really, really competitive professional league.
Absolutely.
With Joe Jackson, who had been kicked out of the game by this time. So imagine all the talent that was sitting on the outskirts. So I really can appreciate the kind of stuff that you like to do and have fun with.
So what I just threw up on the screen, if you could see it on Twitch, I'm at August 1st on the schedule, and you can see the impact these players have had, because this is not how the standings went in 1921. I mean, don't ask me how. The game, baseball is such a funny game. Bernardo Barro, right, was on the Cuban Stars East. And he had a nice year in 1920. He only hit 267 in the Negro leagues, and yet he gets signed by the Giants. He's hitting 403.
Oh, yeah.
I don't, and yet his ratings are not. I mean, I think he's exactly the way he was the season before. So I'm not sure what, he may slump off and finish, much further down by the time the end of the season comes along. But it's interesting that I don't know why he's doing that. But Cool Papa Bell, it's fun to see in there at 21 or whatever he was in 1921 at 39 stolen bases, leading the league. Oscar Charleston over here is having a heck of a year for the Browns. He has them in contention. Hitting 361, 9 homers, 27 steals. So it's been a lot of fun. The guy who I've been following along here, which has been really cool, even though the Braves are in last place, but they signed Bullet Rogan, and Bullet Rogan's, it immediately slotted him into the cleanup spot. But I love looking at this lineup now, because look at this. You got Tony Bokel, Walton Cruz, but then Dick Lundy they signed, and Bullet Rogan, Reb Russell in center, Rabbit Moranville's on the team. And then it immediately slotted Bullet Rogan in as the number one starter. So he's 15-9, and then he's also hitting 325 as their cleanup hitter. So it's just a lot of fun to do these kinds of things. And it's something that, if you've been playing Stratomatic, and I've been playing Stratomatic my whole life, and now out of the park the last bunch of years, this is what, really piqued my interest in all these games, is the what ifs, because part of this what if is just the beauty of the Negro Leagues. I'm going to go ahead and put you back on, but the other thing is, back when we were kids, you always thought you were a better manager than the manager of the actual team that you followed, right? So it gave you the opportunity to go ahead and say, I could have managed the 1976 Phillies to the championship, sure.
yeah, of course.
So, anyway, good. Glad to have you back. Again, I apologize. Wi-Fi is a very, very fickle thing when it comes on these things. So, anyway, I was blabbing for a few minutes while you were getting hooked up, but so no worries. So you I appreciate you getting back on here. But so you talked about the Outsider Baseball. One of the things, we talked a little bit before you got off, before you dropped off there, but you've got a great pinned tweet on Twitter that pretty much sums up, what I hope people can appreciate about everything that's been going on. Can you just walk through those things? Because you were very, very, like I said, the points that you touched on and how you did it. To me, everybody who has any doubts about why the Negro Leagues are major leagues should read it. And Gary Gillette, real quick before you do that, I had Gary Gillette on a few weeks ago. He made a great point as well. He said, and he's got that great, on Baseball Reference, he lists everybody who you can go ahead and find who was involved, what their books are, what their research was, and all that, which is a great, kind of almost like a encyclopedia of who's who. But he mentioned one thing that I hope people understand is there's a number of players in Major League Baseball that were not Major League Baseball caliber, but were playing because there were no Negro League or Caribbean players, Latin players in Major League Baseball. And no one's taking them out of the Major League Baseball record book.
Right.
They're allowed to stay, even though they probably were 4A or AAA or AA and that kind of thing. But anyway, if you could just touch a little bit on those couple of points you made, because I thought that they were great.
Yeah, I think I posted this last October. I knew the announcement was coming, or I had a pretty good inkling of what Major League Baseball was going to decide, because I had been involved in some of those conversations. So I wrote about what I call a stigma that is associated with Black professional baseball. And it goes back 50 years, and there are certain fans that you have encountered that cannot snap out of that. The Negro Leagues, they didn't have a centralized stat bureau. The box scores are missing, and the ones that we do have are riddled with problems. And some people's instincts is to just throw up their hands and say, that's too bad. Why bother with this? Or if you do have data, it's, we can't really include that as part of the Major League record. And a lot of that's just horseshit.
It is.
Listen, and just be honest with, come on. Cap Anson, they were throwing the ball underhand, man.
Yes. Oh my God. Yes. 50 feet
away, and we don't blink an eye.
Yes.
The base hits that he accumulated. He's still in the leaderboard. They were playing in an entirely different game.
Yes.
For a large chunk of his career.
Right before you dropped off, I mentioned somebody said to me, "How is Eugene Bremer now the lowest ERA in a season?" I said, "Wait a minute, it was Tim Keefe before, and he was throwing from underhand from 50 feet. You're okay with that, though?"
Right, but I will. The Bremer stuff, he doesn't have a lot of innings, and I think that's a good conversation to have.
It is.
We understand the Negro Leagues had abbreviated seasons compared to the white majors, and maybe we can come up with some reasonable solutions. But you make a good point that Keefe and these guys were throwing the ball underhand. We include the Federal League records, and that really was a AAA. The Union Association may have been less than AAA. These are all included in the Major League record, and for a large swath of time, you didn't have African American and dark-skinned Latin players in those leagues, even though there were dozens of not just qualified players, but guys who would have been stars and would have challenged Ty Cobb and Babe Ruth for on the league leaderboard. So it's a complex thing. I wanted to talk about the stigma associated with the stats and kind of explain to people preemptively what they're going to see. And what they're going to see is teams that played 70 games, and we have, say, 50 box scores for that team. And what they should realize is that's darn near what they actually did that year. We may be missing 5 games, and we may be able to find 6 more box scores with some hard work. But you're seeing the short seasons. And I think the fact that we went through there was nothing good about last year, but what COVID baseball did was it showed people what a 60-game season would look like, and that's very similar to what a Negro League season would have looked like. They would have played 40, 50 games. Some teams played to 80, 90, even into 100 against other major black teams. But you get used to an unbalanced schedule, ties. It was a totally different type of operation. Just out of necessity, out of absolute survival mode, they had to violate what we would call, best practices for running a business. They would schedule a game in one city, and then 7 days before that, just shift gears and put it into a different city, and they had to survive. They weren't getting help from a lot of white banks and stuff like that. They had to kind of finance this stuff through some people that were involved in gambling and other stuff, and then you had some white promoters who sort of helped these teams survive. But everything is just a lot different in terms of how they had to conduct their business. But once they got on the baseball field, their head-to-head record against white major league teams and minor league teams shows that they were playing at a very, very high quality of baseball. And there's no doubt, and I'm sure you've talked to a lot of guys about just the impact of the first generation: Jackie Robinson, Hank Aaron, Willie Mays, Don Newcomb, Larry Doby, Minoso, how dominant they were the first 15 years.
They came in and changed the game, literally.
Yes, changed the game. Changed the game. And so it just stands to reason that the guys who were the stars the 15 years prior to 1947 would have been as equally dominant and had as big of an impact if our society was different. So.
And nobody is saying that every single Negro League player was on Major League caliber. No. You're going to have your stars. You're going to have your next, your A. You have your A plus, your A, your B, your C, your D, all the way down through. Many of which are going to be cup of coffee guys, and just like Major League Baseball, the same things were there. Anyway, it's frustrated me a little bit with having conversations with some people, and like you mentioned earlier, I think. That element, I mean, it's at this point, no matter what you say, no matter what you show, it's never going to change their opinion, or it's going to be a hard time changing their opinion, and I think you just have to kind of move on.
No, that's what I've done, and I'm okay with some of the criticism if it's intelligent. A lot of it isn't, but
right.
It means that people are talking about it, and that's a good thing. And listen, if Joe Sixpack doesn't want to embrace the stats, well, have fun on your own, Joe Sixpack. I don't care about you, buddy. It's a beautiful thing, man.
It is. Like I said, hats off to you and everybody else who's been keeping these stories alive, doing this research. When you started doing it, like you pointed out earlier, it was not easy. There was not, the access to all this. It was a grind, and to keep on going. And you mentioned a few of these guys that were, prior even to that, and how hard that was to find something, and I'm sure they had the same pushback then, if not even more so, because I think, what another thing about this past year, besides the pandemic giving people a little bit more time to do this, but it was like this past year has been kind of like a perfect storm of things. I mean, you had the Black Lives Matter, happening a year ago. It brought more, light to that sort of thing. Then the pandemic, and then, there's just all these things came together, and I'm just kind of glad it did. I wish, wish it had happened sooner, but better than later.
It was right on time, and like you said, it was the 100th anniversary of the Negro National League, and you had the Black Lives Matter and all of this social unrest, where we're still wrestling with these issues about race in America. It was the perfect storm, but also the other thing that people forget is we did not have the full set of data up until last year. I mean, one goal we had that Gary and Kevin did over at Seamheads was to try to get a full data set up in time for the 100th anniversary. And that was it, just to have a data set up. So had they decided and wanted to do this 5 years ago or 10 years ago, it actually would have been impossible. The fact that the data set was ready to go.
Another thing that came together,
a huge piece, a huge piece. And so
you know,
what an amazing,
it's
it's a baseball miracle, man.
yep, it
It's
really was. To follow up on that Eugene Bremer thing,
mm,
the other thing that this guy I was talking to pointed out is, the limited stats. I said, well, yes, I hear you there. However, the other thing he said was, well, then you look at the Cincinnati Tigers, who we played for that year.
hmm
They nothing adds up. He said, their listing is having this many wins and losses, but the number of
yeah.
games isn't up. Why put out something all half-assed like that? I said, so okay,
Oh my God.
so tell me. So I asked him this. I said, so when is something going to be perfect?
Half-assed.
When is it
Listen,
going to be?
oh my
What
God, yeah.
I know. When is it
That's
going to be good enough? Like, is it next
that's
month?
aggravating, man.
Oh, believe me. Is it going to be next month, next year, 10 years, 20 years from now? When is it going to be perfect enough that it could be put, out there
Yes.
that's going to
When is it up
satisfy
to
you?
his? When is it going to be up to his magical standards?
Exactly.
Listen, I get pissed off. These people
I hear you.
they have no idea how much work has gone into this.
I know.
What you're seeing, for any half of a brain person, is that you're going to see how many games they played, and you're going to be able to figure out how many box scores are still missing.
Yes.
So
That's
the record ends up with
exactly right.
75 games, but the pitching shows 50 starts. It's because we're missing 25 box scores, and maybe we could
Right.
do a better part of communicating this to people, but that's what's happening. We know what the scores were of those games.
Yes.
We simply don't have a box score to add to the data set yet.
So what about this? What about this? You mentioned a good point, and I didn't realize this, that many of the newspapers at the time, the black newspapers at the time, only published once a week.
That's right. Yeah. So,
Interesting.
it's
So,
Courier, and they came out on Saturday usually, I think.
so how do you go about trying to make sure you're not duplicating something, but also on top of that, how do you? I mean, is there any way to really verify? Because I had someone whose grandfather was a former player in the Negro Leagues back in the 50s. Now,
hmm
by this time, that the Negro Leagues were kind of in their kind of spiral,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'm sure things got a little off the rails there. But he was saying his grandfather used to tell him stories about how the players would talk to somebody at a newspaper and they would say, yeah, I went 5 for 5 with 4 doubles and a home run, and like
Yeah.
how do you? I mean, there's how
Yeah.
what's
I mean,
is there a
that's.
credibility level to some of these newspapers? I'm sure some are better than others, right?
I mean, they are. But I think that, to answer your original question, um, listen, the white daily papers covered this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Especially in the 20s and 30s. So you
Mm-hmm.
can go and say, well, I think this game was on Thursday. The Chicago Defender says it was last Thursday. And you can go to the Tribune, and they will have promoted the upcoming game and maybe have the score the next day in the sports section. So you can verify the
Mm-hmm.
dates with a real high degree of accuracy. I mean, you
Right.
might be off a day or two, but you're really 99% of the time you're able to pin down the exact date that game was played using
Mm.
what newspapers, which are really big, and the coverage is a lot better than people realize. So,
Boy,
yes.
I'm sure there's some gold still out there, though. I mean,
Oh, sure.
yeah,
I've found like 3 dozen. I've found 3 dozen box scores with the help of some friends. Um,
wow,
in the last 6 7 weeks, which we are going to add to the database, including some
cool,
games for Josh Gibson, a monster game from Buck O'Neill where he hit, I believe, 2 home runs. So you're going to see,
cool.
especially in the 1940s, there is still some work to be done, and you're going to see the data change periodically at Baseball Reference. We're not going to do this every week. It's going to be every 3 4 months maybe,
How
and we'll
does
just.
that? How does that? I was just going to ask you, how would that process work? So you come up with something, you verify it, they bless it.
Yeah.
I'm assuming. What would they make an announcement? Would they say something when something changes, or just kind of
Yeah, I don't
add it
know.
in?
I mean, it's maybe they should. You're going to see slight adjustments, 2 extra games for somebody in 1936,
Hmm.
something like that. But they have Shohei Ohtani's stats, and they just change every day because they're playing a game every day.
Right.
They don't make an announcement. So the Negro Leagues are going to be a little bit like that, in that you're going to see the data
Ah,
sets
yeah.
slowly grow over time. That
Cool.
nothing is cemented in stone. You will see more home runs for Josh Gibson, and more base hits for Oscar Charleston, and you will see the data sets grow as we find more box scores and find more games. And as a matter of
Cool.
fact, even in the last 48 hours, we found a couple of games that are going to be added to the data set. We have not stopped with this.
Awesome. And I'm sure it's going to go on for a long time. And then, somebody who I can't remember who. I'm coming up on 50 of these conversations, which is really, to me, I can't believe I've done that many. It's awesome, yeah. And I'm hoping to have somebody really a special guest for the 50th coming up here in another 3-4. But the not that all you guys are not. I could talk all day to you guys about this stuff. I really could. And with you with the simulations and Stratomatic, I mean, my God. But some of the stuff that I'm hoping people get out of this is the hard work that all you guys have done, and that look around. There's maybe you can help, because there's newspapers accounts. There's a team. There was a barnstorming tour. There was something that happened. Odds are, there's very few places in the country, if not the continent, that there wasn't a Negro League something that came through there. And so, you never know when you might step on it, and pass it along, let people know,
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. Somebody could reach out to me. We have certain cities that we know need to be explored. Columbus, Ohio. Meadville, Pennsylvania. We know where the gold is hidden. We just, the papers that we need have not been digitized yet. And obviously, we have to work for a living, so we can't just fly around and go to these places. People can catch me at Scott _Simkus SIMKUS on Twitter, and reach out to me if they and see if they would be willing to help. And that's how I found, with the help of Ray Danner and Travis Sawchick, we found a bunch of games in Erie, Pennsylvania that are going to be added to the database soon, including the Monarchs and the Grays and the Cleveland Buckeyes, and that was a collaboration where they lived there and they were able to devote some time to it, and I was able to point them in the direction of these are the years you want to look for, these are the teams you want to search for, and doggone it, we found about a dozen or 15 games in Erie that we knew were hidden there or had suspected were hidden there.
Nice.
Because there was gaps in the travel log. Like, we really know our shit, man.
I know you guys
traveling. We know how, they would go from Cleveland up into Niagara Falls and Hamilton, Ontario. So we know the cities they were going to pass through. We know the dates they were passing by, and we know where they had played previously. So just using the, deductive reasoning, we know where a lot of this stuff is hidden. We just need human beings that want to help. Mm-hmm. We need more people that want to dig, as opposed to the analysts and the guys that are kind of obsessed with trying to quantify what John Beckwith means and what Dick Lundy means, which is cool stuff. But as a researcher and a historian, man, and I want to rebuild as much of this as we can, and not to make Joe Blow dummy happy that the data's up to his standards, but what we're going to do is the best that you can possibly do.
Absolutely.
And for people that are open-minded and want to learn about this stuff,
I would have loved
to. I mean, would you not have loved to have had this stuff 20 years ago?
Absolutely. The stories, like I said, when I shook Double Duty Radcliffe's hands and we sat there, it was like hours went by and these guys were talking and they're telling these stories, and it's like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Everybody should hear these. And I'm sure there's a little degree of embellishment, a little bit maybe, I don't know,
Maybe a lot.
but maybe a lot, but I'll tell you what, it doesn't discount from the life stories that these guys have. I just think it's beautiful, man, what you guys have done. Who's your favorite? You have any favorites? Any favorite players? Any favorite Negro League teams?
Oh boy, we
got a Grays hat on there, right?
I got the Grays. I like the Grays. The Chicago American Giants as a local team are interesting to me, but I really am fascinated by the Grays and the Monarchs, who just very well run. All kinds of terrific players have played with them over the years.
I mean, I grew up in Pennsylvania. I'm a little partial to the Grays, but I also like the Hilldales. I grew up on the eastern part of the state. But I started to say this and I lost my train of thought there. Somebody mentioned to me a couple weeks ago that there's this for the Negro Leagues that are currently now being looked at and considered by Major League Baseball. However, there were a myriad of teams which would be considered their minor leagues at
Yeah.
various levels. How much work is that going to be something that people are going to get into as well? Is there going to be more research done on these teams and put together
Yeah,
like kind of
I
like a
mean,
minor league type of database too?
I
Or no?
would, yeah, I think that's a conversation that should be happening over the next year or two. Is maybe
That
we
would be cool.
classify the Negro Southern League as a AAA operation, because they called themselves Negro Organized Baseball in the
Yeah,
press. They
yeah.
they consider themselves, I mean, disorganized perhaps compared to white organized baseball, but they took pride in what they were doing. It was a hell of a lot harder than white major leagues. You had
Mm-hmm.
the travel is just grueling. I don't know how these guys did it,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, there were black professional leagues in Texas and in Louisiana
Mm-hmm.
or Oklahoma, Louisiana. There was the Negro Southern League, and there were always barnstorming independent teams, which the Grays and the Monarchs were independent for a number of years. And I'm trying to lobby Major League Baseball to possibly actually classify those as independent major league teams, which would be
Right.
unprecedented. But
But
they should be.
yeah,
They should be because they were better than most of the teams that were in the leagues. The players participated in the East-West All-Star game. There was years the Monarchs were all over that field in Comiskey Park, and they were not members of the league that year.
that's
So
an awesome point.
that should be considered, and then you would see the data change at Baseball Reference, because right now Sean Foreman has elected to not include those teams, and I think it's fair enough.
Yeah.
Everything is subject to change with more information. But really, some of those independent Grays teams, the Monarchs teams, the Atlanta Black Crackers possibly, who were not very good, but played 50 games almost in 1943 as an independent, should be included. And the what is it, the analogy or the metaphor that I would use is, say, Notre Dame in college football, which was always a powerhouse and a ranked team, but were they part of the conference? No.
No.
And that is how the Monarchs and the Homestead Grays and certainly should be viewed.
Many players, I'm sure, that could have had fantastic careers in some of the organized leagues, organized teams, were making more money barnstorming.
Yeah.
And chose not to, or maybe didn't play as many games as they could, and yeah, I mean there's probably a ton of those guys that are out there. I mean, John Donaldson probably has more at bats and more games pitched that outside of any organized games than he did in them. So yeah, I mean, that's gonna be hard to quantify some of that stuff, but man, I tell you what, it's gonna be a lot of fun. I wish you luck with all that. I hope. What are you planning on working on next? You gonna do another book on anything? You're gonna?
Well, I'm running my business, trying to stay afloat there. Baseball wise, I continue to help Seamheads as we try to plug in the gaps. That's one of my big initiatives.
Cool.
I'm also involved in a tech startup. We've been working on this for 8 or 9 months. It's a baseball business.
Cool.
Yes, it involves the Negro Leagues, but it's really more than that. It's something that's going to appeal to baseball fans from all stripes.
Nice.
And I can't tell you much other than the people I'm involved with are pretty well known.
Cool.
And maybe next year you and I can talk about it on here.
Absolutely.
Okay? I think
Absolutely.
it's going to be nuts,
Would
man.
love it.
It's going to be nuts.
Yeah, would love
I'm
it.
excited about that.
Absolutely. Cool. Best of luck with that. I'm glad. I hope.
Thank you.
Keep telling these stories, man. It's
Thank you.
without you, and I tell you what, you could probably count on your fingers and toes the number of people over the last 20, 30 years that have kept at this. I mean, I'm sure there's some who had bigger impacts than others, but there's not a lot. And without all you guys doing what you did, and raising the awareness and telling the stories, and it's like I said, who knows where we'd be at with all this, but I think we're in a much better place right now than this was certainly just a few years ago. So yeah, that's good. All right, man. I appreciate your time. I'm going to, like I said, we'll get you on here again down the road. Apologies. Too bad. I'm sorry you had your technical difficulties there, but that's okay. No, that's okay. I was in the middle of a stream, and the same thing happened to me. It knocked me off, and I get it. It is what it is. But to be able to do these kinds of things like this is, to me, it's great. I mean, even just a few years ago, you couldn't even do this. So this is
It's a blessing, man. Hey, thanks for having me on, Philip. I really appreciate it. Okay.
All right, man. Best of luck, and we'll talk to you again soon.
You take care.
All right,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.